Oh, no worries, no worries. All right, well, welcome back for our second panel, which will focus on anti-competitive conduct by incumbent manufacturers that reduces, as opposed to delays, competition from lower-priced generics or biosimilar alternatives, including rebating strategies and product hopping. Again, I would ask that all panelists be mindful of time constraints when responding to questions. Our listening session today will conclude promptly at 4. But let's go ahead and introduce you all. And I'll start with Alex Brill. Mr. Brill is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. His public policy and public finance research includes work on healthcare matters, including drug competition and drug innovation. He has testified numerous times before Congress and written on a host of issues. Before joining AEI, Mr. Brill served as the policy director and chief economist of the House Ways and Means Committee, and prior to that, served on the staff of the White House Council of Economic Advisors.
Michael Carrier is a Board of Governors professor at Rutgers Law School, where he specializes in antitrust and IP law. He is co-author of the leading IP antitrust treatise, and he is a prolific writer and speaker on pharmaceutical antitrust issues. Professor Carrier has testified numerous times before Congress, the FDA, and the FTC.
All right, James Gelfand is president and CEO of the ERISA Industry Committee, having previously served as its senior and then executive vice president. Mr. Gelfand oversees all aspects of the association's activities, which focus on programs that shape federal and state health and retirement benefit priorities, and that impact member companies' ability to operate under federal ERISA protection from a patchwork of conflicting state and local laws.
Julie Reed is the executive director of the Biosimilars Forum, a trade association for the U.S. biosimilars industry, where she represents companies with U.S. biosimilar development portfolios. Ms. Reed has also worked as a clinician, hospital administrator, and healthcare executive in the global pharmaceutical and medical device industries.
And our last panelist is Jocelyn Ulrich. She is Vice President of Policy and Research at the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America. At Pharma, she is responsible for developing legislative and policy analysis and research studies on a range of issues impacting biopharmaceutical companies, including intellectual property issues, FDA policy issues, the R&D process, and the value of innovation. In addition to her experience at Pharma, she has over 15 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry.
Our first question is for Mr. Brill. The FDA approved the first biosimilar in March of 2015, and in the decade since, 75 biosimilars have been approved. What are the key economic and regulatory challenges that have impacted adoption of these biosimilar products in the United States?
Thank you, and thank you for the question and the opportunity to be here with colleagues to talk about this important issue. I'd like to begin by acknowledging first the importance of balancing two policy objectives in this marketplace, both the importance of encouraging competition as well as the importance of encouraging innovation. As has been said in the first session, tremendous clinical benefits are derived from today's innovative medicines, and additional R&D in new medicines will yield new valuable cures and treatments. These innovative incentives need to be carefully designed to be predictable, efficient, and adequate, but I would also stress designed to minimize the risk that they can be misused to thwart competition. Now, recognizing the importance of incentives for innovation should not be misconstrued. Large, complex, high-stakes drug markets do attract aggressive anti-competitive behaviors. Moreover, legal and regulatory practices can impede or be exploited to impede desirable improvements in the competitiveness of these important markets. With that broad framework, let me offer a few specific observations. First, the burdens of these anti-competitive tactics that we've been discussing exceed what is generally observable in the market today. Biosimilar manufacturers, their decisions to pursue market entry factor in the risk that anti-competitive tactics will be used in the future to thwart their market entry or their ability to capture market share. This risk that these manufacturers face, this potential risk, can have a chilling effect on their early stage decisions to develop and seek approval for their competitive products. Now, these effects will not be readily observable in the market because they reflect the competitive battles not waged, rather than the effects of the battles we see play out in the courts and in the media. The collective effects of a host of anti-competitive tactics, some of which we've already discussed, but including things like patent thickets and product hopping, raise the risk that to manufacturers that the time and cost required to bring a biosimilar to market will be extended in an unpredictable manner. These strategies create uncertainty and are unequivocally inefficient. They add cost to the system with little to no benefit. Second, I'd like to note that the barriers to competition are not limited to the actions of private actors in the marketplace, something that was acknowledged earlier as well. The government's own regulatory structures impose barriers that can have important consequences on market competition. And two examples I think are worth highlighting. First, as you noted, while the FDA has approved over 70 biosimilars, these products represent competition primarily among the blockbuster reference products. In fact, data from IQVIA indicates that approximately 90% of biologics that are expected to lose patent protection in the coming decade are not currently expected to face competition. High fixed costs associated with the development and approval of biosimilars are likely one critical factor limiting this pipeline. And to foster competition across a wider array of biologic drugs, smaller biologic drugs in particular, regulators and policymakers should consider streamlining the approval process. And second, and finally, I'll note that the incentive for biosimilar competition for competitors to undertake these large risks and investments to enter the market to drive down prices is predicated on their expectation for some initial economic return. However, new government price-setting mechanisms in Medicare can negate, delay, or diminish the incentives for this market-based competition. This disincentive for market-based competition should be acknowledged and should be rectified by policymakers. And with that, I'll close and say again, thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you. Our next question is for Ms. Reed. Patient access to biologics and biosimilars is largely dependent on drug formularies designed by pharmacy benefit managers. The drug manufacturers pay rebates in exchange for placement on those formularies. Could you speak about these rebating practices and how they impact biosimilar market uptake?
How many hours do I have?
We've got 5 to 6 minutes.
Okay, darn. All right, well, thank you, first of all, for the opportunity to be here and to be participating on this important panel. I represent the biosimilars industry through the Biosimilars Forum here in the United States. Our members are the companies, around, not just in the U.S., but around the globe, with the greatest number of biosimilars either in development, on the market, and approved in the U.S., but also in over 80 countries. I've been around the biosimilar industry now globally for 25 years. The anti-competitive practices of PBMs have had significant negative impact on the biosimilars industry. 3 PBMs control, as everyone knows, 80% of the access to the market in the U.S., and they have not given access to lower cost biosimilars. The best story of this is our Humira experience. Our members have had over 10 Humira biosimilars, both approved by the FDA and launched in this U.S. market. The PBMs have not given them access to the U.S. market. That's 10. That's over $1 billion in development, probably $1.5 billion to $3 billion. As Alex said, it takes 7 to 9 years to develop a biosimilar, and it takes anywhere between $100 million and $250 million. These are not short-term decisions. Today, those 10 Humira biosimilars combined have less than 10% of the market share in the U.S. Those 10 biosimilars are at a minimum 80% discounted from the reference Humira. 80%. 80% off an $84,000 a year drug. And there is no market share because the PBMs prefer the highly rebated, full price, fully loaded brand drug. So patients like Shauna do not get access to an 85% decreased cost and at a young age, and I apologize for that. And our industry would like to help you. You've got your whole life ahead of you, and you should not worry that you can't have access to a lower cost drug. So with that, PBMs have, as Alex have just said, PBMs are also creating the biosimilar void. You need to take that very seriously. Companies are already making pipeline decisions. Out of 118 reference products that'll lose patent in the next 10 years, only 12 are being developed. 12 out of 118. Currently, the country's saving $56 billion. You could save over $181 billion in 5 years if we don't have that void and if we continue to be able to be an industry in the U.S. The biosimilars industry was created under ACA and BPCIA, and it's the first new competitive drug industry for things that come off patent or we can get them on the market. One of the key things, there's a void already within 10 years. We're celebrating our 10th year. The PBMs are blocking us. They're not giving us access. So what has to happen? There has to be PBM reform. There has to be delinking. There has to be preferred status on formularies for lower cost products. The PBM industry made the generic industry. We all of a sudden got $0 copay generics. No one's getting that with a biosimilar. And these are $100,000 drugs. So there's a void. We're not going to make them. 10 years from now, I hope I'm not sitting here. I hope I get to retire, but I hope there's an industry. And I think everyone needs to take this seriously. I've been talking at FTC and on the Hill since 2006 and talking around the world about biosimilars. We got to stop talking about the problem. We got to solve the problem. I appreciate being here. My members are devoted to bringing a low-cost, competitive, FDA-approved product, but we can't continue to do it without anyone's support. So, thank you.
Our next question is for Ms. Ulrich. The development of biologic products has transformed various therapeutic areas and expanded treatment options, but the high cost of these products may put them out of reach for some American patients. What are some sustainable solutions to balance the support of innovation while increasing access to affordable drugs?
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I will start by saying it is no accident that today the United States leads the world in the development of treatments and cures for patients. This is the direct result of our carefully designed ecosystem built over many years through smart public policies that encourage risk-taking and collaboration. Critical to the biopharmaceutical industry's success in the United States is strong and reliable intellectual property protections that give companies the certainty they need to make the long-term investments required to bring new medicines to patients, as well as to improve them for additional patient benefit. However, this leadership is not guaranteed. China now barely trails the United States in the share of new clinical trial starts globally and has already surpassed us in hosting cancer clinical trials with 39% of the global total. The only way to stay ahead is by cementing the U.S. as the world's most attractive biopharmaceutical research and investment country. The biopharmaceutical sector is one of the most research-intensive industries in the United States, spending more than $100 billion every year researching and developing new medicines for patients, despite only a 12% successfully achieving FDA approval. Even as the industry commits massive resources to this R&D, the industry ranks in the middle of the pack for annual issued patents compared to other high IP industries, affirming that the industry's patenting behavior is not an outlier. By any measure, America's IP framework has been a resounding success. Despite the long odds, biopharmaceutical companies have launched nearly 900 new medicines since 2000, resulting in significant progress against some of the most costly and challenging diseases, and many of these have been due to biologic medicines. For example, CAR T therapies are curing advanced childhood leukemia, while checkpoint inhibitors are transforming cancer care, contributing to a 33% drop in cancer death rates since the 1990s. Biologics have dramatically improved outcomes in daily functioning for patients with autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's, and psoriasis. And genome-edited therapy offers a potential cure for sickle cell disease, showcasing how these therapies could replace costly chronic care with one-time treatments. Importantly, our IP system not only incentivizes development of new medicine, it spurs competition that lowers healthcare costs. Many companies can research the same disease, and the brand-to-brand competition that results when companies seek to develop the most effective treatments for patients drives choice, and it decreases net prices by as much as 60%. Post-approval R&D further expands treatment options, and IP protections on those advances do not prevent the approval of generic copies or biosimilars of earlier versions. Today, in fact, as was mentioned earlier, 90% of prescriptions in the U.S. are filled with generic and biosimilar medicines, which are 33% cheaper on average than in other OECD countries. On average, also, as we talked about earlier, a small molecule drug is on the market only 13 years before facing competition from generics, which can cost over 80% less than the brand. Patent settlements have accelerated patient access to generic and biosimilar medicines to market by, on average, more than 5 years before patent expiration, and since 2013 have resulted in $423 billion in savings to the healthcare system. This framework is what makes the marketplace for medicines unique. Similar cost containment mechanisms do not exist for any other part of the healthcare system. Medicines are the only part where prices go down over time. But there are real challenges to getting more affordable options to patients. Insurance companies and their PBMs control which medicines are covered, how much patients pay, and what barriers they face to access prescribed treatments. Today, as Julie mentioned, 3 PBMs control nearly 80% of the market and are vertically integrated with insurers, pharmacies, and provider groups, significantly impacting whether patients can benefit from this innovation and competition. PBMs inflate costs by marking up medicines dispensed through their own pharmacies, often by hundreds or even thousands of percent. And over the last 5 years, PBMs have increasingly excluded biosimilars from their commercial formularies. PBMs aren't the only intermediaries that are profiting at patients' expense. The 340B program, created to help underserved patients, often benefits hospitals instead. 340B hospitals are more likely to prescribe costly drugs, and biosimilar adoption is 23 percentage points lower among commercially insured patients at 340B hospitals compared to non-340B hospitals. Policymakers should be focused today on advancing policies where competition could be enhanced without undermining the very foundation of the industry's ability to innovate. And this includes addressing the misaligned incentives in the PBM market, fixing the 340B hospital market program, as well as making foreign countries pay their fair share for innovation. Thank you very much, and look forward to the discussion.
Our next question is for Mr. Gelfand. Biologics have provided important advances in treating serious medical conditions, but in addition to the cost to patients, these treatments can be extremely expensive for employers. Biosimilars have the potential to reduce those costs. What challenges do employers face when trying to incorporate biosimilars into their health plans, and what changes could mitigate those challenges?
Thank you for the opportunity to be here. As Jill mentioned, I'm the president and CEO of the ERISA Industry Committee. ERIC represents large employers in their capacity as sponsors of employee benefit plans. More than 160 million Americans get health benefits through an employer, and large employers pay more than 80% of healthcare costs for employees and families. But that's increasingly difficult today in today's prescription drug market due to extreme anti-competitive conduct that takes place. Anti-competitive practices amount to a massive tax on employers, translating to fewer jobs and less take-home pay for hardworking Americans. In my remarks today, I will outline concerns that employers have regarding pharmacy benefit managers, gaming of the patent system, and unacceptable regulatory barriers. First, PBMs. You've heard several times now that 3 PBMs control over 80% of the prescription drug market. PBMs are extremely secretive, often hiding an employer's own claims data and the prices that the employer pays for drugs, or holding that data hostage for incredibly high fees. They routinely refuse to allow employers to compare the net prices of drugs and obfuscate about their compensation. Let me give you a powerful example, which is the launch of the Humira biosimilars. Humira is the highest grossing drug ever and thus a major cost to employers. We had very high hopes for biosimilar products entering the market to start competing, and we knew that this was a make or break moment for a successful biosimilars market. Humira's list price was about $6,700. Its biosimilars launched at around $1,000. So even accounting for rebates, the biosimilars' net cost was still over $1,000 less than the brand. But after biosimilars became available, PBMs still pushed the higher priced branded products. Why? Because PBM compensation is not based on getting the lowest net price. Instead, they profit from big rebates and they charge fees to drug manufacturers through the PBM's overseas group purchasing organizations. Those fees are a percentage of the list price, so 5% of $6,700 is far more than 5% of $1,000. These fees also create a major ethical problem for these middlemen, who employers are hiring to negotiate the lowest possible costs for working families. One PBM we are aware of even imposed a try-first requirement where a patient would have to try the branded drug and fail before they could get the cheaper biosimilar drug. Employers want the lowest net cost options, but PBMs often present misleading data, focusing only on rebate percentages or telling plans that rebates are bundled across a pharma manufacturer's entire product portfolio. This is not a free market, it's a distorted one, where employers can't get basic pricing information. And PBMs forbid biosimilar manufacturers from sharing net pricing details with employers. And if an informed employer may still have no recourse, as PBM contracts generally prohibit carving out drugs from the PBM's formulary or extract prohibitive fees from an employer seeking to do so. Even worse, PBMs now create private label biosimilars under the auspices of their own drug companies, and I'm putting quotes because those companies do not produce drugs. They partner with manufacturers and hike up the cost, sometimes charging a 200% or higher markup, and then sell it to patients under their own brands. These private label drugs are often slightly cheaper than the brand name drug, but vastly more expensive than competing biosimilars. This manipulation undercuts biosimilar sustainability, and that's not the only obstacle to competition. Patent thickets are another major problem where brand name manufacturers patent the same invention multiple times using slightly different language. Look at any new drug's patents in the United States. Chances are that you will see they have many more patents in the United States than they do overseas. To get on the market and to compete, the biosimilar companies have to spend millions of dollars trying to invalidate each of these individual patents. These tactics delay competition, they keep prices high. Eric supports legislation by Congressman Jody Arrington which would crack down on this abuse, but it shouldn't be needed as this kind of anti-competitive gaming of the patent system shouldn't be tolerated. Finally, I want to address a major regulatory barrier, the supposed need for interchangeability designations before pharmacists can substitute biosimilars. There is no clinical difference between biosimilars and their reference products, and obtaining this designation requires hundreds of millions of dollars and years of lost market share while conducting studies. A misinformation campaign was used to pass laws in many states preventing substitution of biosimilars without that interchangeability designation. The FDA has gone to great lengths to correct the record, but the damage persists. Eric supports legislation by Senator Mike Lee, which would negate this anti-competitive tactic. In conclusion, employers believe change is needed to restore competition. PBM practices like rebate walls, private labeling, and pricing opacity hurt patients and drive up costs for employers. Patent games and requirements for unnecessary studies increase the barriers to entry for biosimilars into the U.S. market and inappropriately increase exclusivity for branded drugs, costing employers and working families many billions of dollars. We appreciate the opportunity to be here and contribute to this discussion, and I look forward to working with you to bring accountability and reform to the prescription drug marketplace.
Our next question is for Professor Carrier. Consumers depend on pharmaceutical manufacturers to develop new drug products to improve treatment options, but sometimes manufacturers make what seem to be minor therapeutic changes to their products and then take steps to switch patients to the new product, which can ultimately impede generic competition. Can you give some background on product hopping cases and address recent developments with pharmacy benefit managers?
Sure. So thank you for the question, and thank you for holding this really important event. Product hopping is nuanced because it involves the intersection of antitrust law, patent law, the federal Hatch-Waxman Act, state drug product substitution laws. It also involves markets that are unique because you have the decider, the doctor, who is different from the payer, the insurance company, or the patient. And so you have lots of room for anti-competitive behavior. By product hopping, Steve Shadow and I have defined it as reformulating the version of the drug so that the generic is not substitutable on the first hand, and then also encouraging doctors to write scripts for the reformulated version. So if you are expanding the prescription base, that is fine. If you're migrating it over to impair competition, that is less fine. And also it avoids state substitution laws. So state substitution laws require that the drug be bioequivalent, therapeutically equivalent. These small changes are enough to get out of those substitution laws, and so that is a real problem with what's going on. So a really quick recap of 5 leading product hopping cases just in terms of the facts. First, we have the Tricor case. That was a hard switch. That's where the brand company pulls the old version from the market, and the market is just left with the new version. That is what happened in Tricor. Second is the Walgreens case, which was a soft switch from Prilosec to Nexium. Soft means that Prilosec remained on the market. Third was the Suboxone case, where the brand firm raised the original price. It also disparaged the original. It warned of false safety concerns. Fourth is the Dorix case, which was a hard switch, where the brand company bought back and destroyed capsules. And fifth was the Namenda case, where the brand version removed the original, and even before that, announced the discontinuance. That is all unilateral conduct, and what I'd like to talk about now is the intersection of product hopping and PBMs. Now, this might look like collusion. It might look like the folks on this side of the panel have all been talking about PBMs, even though this is not the session for PBMs. It might even look like collusion among us, and I would hope that this would not be per se illegal, but maybe under the rule of reason, we have some good reasons to talk about that. I hope that the court would consider that. But what I'd like to offer as a big picture approach here is it's not just blame the other side. Sometimes you hear pharma says it's not us, it's PBMs, and PBMs say it's not us, it's pharma. Maybe it's all of the above. Maybe there is enough blame to go around so that it's more than just one simple bad actor here. So in terms of PBMs, I don't have to repeat all that's been said so far, but clearly it's in the interest of both parties here. So the manufacturer benefits when it gets its drug placed on the formulary. That is a true benefit because that means it's available to the patient. The PBM benefits because the PBM gets a large rebate, doesn't always pass it on to the ultimate payer. And so there's a lot of benefit for both sides here. Let me offer a couple of examples. Victoria Field and I have written about 4 examples. The first example is Humira. Again, I feel like on this panel we all have to talk about Humira. But let me just mention the formulary placement issue in terms of the money. So you have a very expensive drug that is included on the formulary. Basically what Humira did here is it switched in 2019 to next-gen therapies like Skyrizi taken a few times a year, Rinvoq taken daily, even though in early 2024 biosimilar uptake was 400% higher, the prescription fill volume went down because of all this product hopping. So again, you had Skyrizi, which had a $21,000 list price that was on the same tier as drugs that were a third of that. You had inexpensive drugs, only $1,000, that were excluded from the formulary. Big picture, formulary placement makes a big deal, and the PBM and the manufacturer can work together to engage in product hopping. And my final example is Copaxone. That involves tying rebates to the inclusion of a new drug. So here, Teva is switching from a 20 milligram dose of MS treating Copaxone to a 40 milligram dose. The clinical trials failed to show that the 40 milligram dose was superior. The internal presentation said that, quote, the data is not going to support the higher doses. The scientific team was strongly against it, but the life cycle management team said there's business value here. When you bring it over to the PBMs, Teva pressured the PBMs by tying the rebates on the 20 to the inclusion of the 40. In other words, PBMs, if you want to have the 20 there, you also have to include the 40. So there was one PBM that forfeited its rebate because it didn't include the 40. The next year it came back and included the 40. This had a real effect. Copaxone 40 had 77% of the market within 2 years, and according to one empirical analysis, the strategy cost the U.S. healthcare system $4 to $6 billion in additional expenditures over a 2-year period. So in short, product hopping and PBMs, manufacturers and PBMs can work together to engage in product hopping. Thank you.
Our next question is back to Mr. Brill. Certain diseases only impact a relatively small patient population, which limits the potential market size for drugs targeting those rare conditions and may affect incentives for biosimilar development. Are there any specific regulatory reforms or other initiatives that could promote biosimilar development for smaller drug markets?
Sure, thanks for the question. So I think in 2 parts. One could think generally about regulatory reforms that would not be targeted towards small market products or orphan population products that would have benefits for those orphan market products. So a broad reform, say elimination of a requirement for switching studies or something of that nature, would benefit all biosimilars, including those smaller products. Or I should say, policymakers could think about narrower targeted incentives to encourage the development of competitive products for these smaller market products. You'd have to balance that in a clinical context. You'd want to preserve the clinical integrity of the biosimilar development, but one could develop ideas related to exclusivities for biosimilars for those smaller products. I think one thing that would be important to recognize is that expectations for the degree of competition in those markets would be less than in, say, the example that now I've also acknowledged, the Humira environment. Now we've all said it, where there are near or 10 or more biosimilars. So you would get a less dynamic, a less competitive marketplace, but in the smaller product. But you should still consider policies to create competition there as well.
Our next question is for Ms. Reed. Rebating strategies that favor high list prices and high rebates may hinder competition from biosimilar products trying to launch at lower list prices. What changes would you like to see regarding formulary access and rebating practices to better support competition from biosimilars?
Thank you. Really, PBM reform needs to happen, and not just what is being proposed as today. We need transparency, but that transparency is only going to give policymakers what we all know is happening. It does not move that the PBMs are forced to accept or promote lower cost products like they did small molecules. We need delinking. We need pass-through rebates. We need to get PBMs to provide access to lower costs biosimilars. We also need Medicare, CMS, to remove their no interference clause between them and the PBMs. The CMS and Medicare is one of the largest insurers in this country, cannot tell the PBMs we want the lower cost biosimilar. As a future Medicare patient and beneficiary, I kind of want the lower cost biosimilar. So those things. But I'm going to steal your question a little bit more and tell you that we will give you as industry very specific things that could happen at the FDA after 15 years. It's time to evolve the FDA. We need to get rid of interchangeability. As was said by one of the other speakers, that was put in the original bill as a misinformation, as a barrier, creating a false second standard for biosimilars. We need to get rid of it. We need to increase the efficiencies at the FDA. We need to give the OTBB the ability to review and add their signature to a biosimilar application. They don't have that, but they're the experts in the science of biosimilars. We need to eliminate the FDA's over-conservative, I'm sorry, I ignored your 1 minute, the over-conservative approach to biosimilars, three-way PK studies. Right now, the FDA routinely requires the biosimilar manufacturer to prove that the reference product bought in Europe is the same as the reference product in the U.S. Even though publicly they are, we have to do a very expensive three-way PK studies. We need to eliminate the crazy biosimilar suffix. No one uses it. All right, it was created so that you knew the biosimilar had a safety signal. We have 10 years of FDA research that shows no biosimilar has had a safety signal. Get rid of the FDA of the suffix. No one uses it, and let's give the time back to the FDA people who are looking at suffixes or applying suffixes to do real work. We need to provide greater, as Alex said, greater efficiencies at the agency. Let the agency use their 15 years of experience to improve biosimilars development and evaluation. We know that if we can get these things done, if all of us could get PBM stuff done, if all of us could get stability in physicians' reimbursement, if we can improve the FDA process, we will go after the products that are in the void. But we can't continue to take 7 to 9 years and hundreds of millions of dollars to develop a biosimilar after 15 years. So I just continue to tell you all, if you want this industry here in 10 years, we cannot be the only people doing this stuff. So thank you. And thank you for giving me more time.
Our next question is from Ms. Ulrich. What are some steps that pharma and its members are taking to support access to lower cost drug products?
Thanks. So, similar to some of the things that Julie talked about, I think critically important is advancing reforms on the PBM agenda, making sure that compensation for PBMs is being tied not to the, or that copay for patients is not being tied to the list price, that we're sharing the savings. We're looking at those incentives and also importantly looking at the growing trend towards all the vertical integration. I think we also really believe that 340B reform would be critically important, as I mentioned in my opening remarks. And then, really, as I said in the end, we've increasingly been discussing the fact that patients here are paying a premium on prices because other countries are not paying their fair share of innovation. There are certainly things that, through trade agreements and other things that Congress could do to ensure that countries are paying a more fair share towards innovation, that they are increasing their healthcare budgets, and in particular for innovative medicines, and that would certainly relieve some of the pressure here. And I think all those things together, I think, would make a big difference.
Our next question is for Professor Carrier. Product hopping has received attention from both the courts and Congress, where bipartisan legislation was introduced to prohibit manufacturers from engaging in product hopping. How do congressional and court approaches to product hopping compare, and what are key considerations for stakeholders trying to address this problem?
Thank you. So one concern is that courts don't always fully appreciate the harms from product hopping. That's especially the case with soft switches, where the old drug remains on the market. So for example, you look at the Walgreens case, the court said the old version's on the market, you're adding choices, the market will determine which is superior. That is a bit simplistic. There were allegations in that case that of the dozens of options, this was the worst for consumers. A government official said doctors should be embarrassed if they prescribed the drug. The CEO said if this was left to R&D, there would not be Nexium. This was driven by marketing. There were negative speculative false claims. So there is tons of evidence there that this was a concerning product hop. If you just focus on the fact that it was a soft switch, therefore it's per se legal, that doesn't capture it. Similarly, in the Dorix case, lots of concerning examples here of hard switches. Nonetheless, the court said this is not David versus Goliath. Mylan was a victim of its own business strategy. These are approaches that are very concerning. And so there is legislation that has been introduced in the past several Congresses from Senators Blumenthal and Cornyn that would address these issues, that would address soft switches as well. Tons of protection for brand firms in there. The legislation limits the conduct to a particular window in time in which generic entry is expected. There are exclusions based on marketing. There are justifications. So if the brand firm would have made this change, regardless of the effect on generic competition, then automatically it's fine. This is the no economic sense test, as conservative a test as you'll find in the case law. And so that's legislation that is worth a careful look. Sometimes we hear that we can't do anything on product hopping because that would harm innovation. I think to the contrary. If you remove antitrust legislation here, then that is a problem. Now, I've written about examples like Tricor, Neurontin, and Nemenda, where the brand firm had the innovation and sat on it for years until the generic was about to enter the market. And so we need to have robust competition here through legislation and the courts. And then one final point is we've heard today about patents, and we don't know the number of patents that are the issue. Two quick responses on that. Sean Tu and I engaged in an empirical analysis of patents in the pharmaceutical industry versus those in the high-tech industry, and we showed that the patents are used differently, obviously more cross-licensing in the high-tech industry. We looked at continuations. It's very different. Just because it's okay in high-tech doesn't mean it's okay in pharma. And then finally, you look at the Humira example. It's not the number of patents. It's what was done with the patents. The district court there said that AbbVie listed 9 formulation patents with ingredients not in the biosimilar or Humira. Quote, in other words, they were objectively baseless to assert. The court didn't follow that. The Seventh Circuit brushed that under the rug. If this is objectively baseless to assert, that's the sham exception to Noor-Bennington. And so let's look at the facts before we jump to these overall legal conclusions. Thank you.
Our next question is Mr. Gelfand, and you've already touched on this topic, as has another panelist, but just to go back to it and dig deeper. Small molecule generics are typically substituted for brand prescriptions at the pharmacy counter. In the biologic space, there are biosimilars and interchangeable biosimilars. What is the significance of the interchangeable designation, and how does it impact biosimilar access and affordability?
Thank you. I think if we're going to talk about interchangeability, we should start by acknowledging that the very existence of this designation was a poison pill added to legislation 15 years ago. This is a designation that does not exist in Europe or elsewhere because it is duplicative. If the FDA approves a product as a safe and effective biosimilar for a given reference drug, then by definition, it is already interchangeable. The only reason to require further study is to slow down the ability to substitute. And it is widely known that substitution was the key to unlocking savings from generics in the small molecule market. And if we can't substitute in the large molecule market, we're not going to capture the savings that we did. So FDA has repeatedly sought to dispel the notion that there's any difference between biosimilars with or without the interchangeability designation, but stakeholders who are defending the status quo continue to publish misinformation. The effect of this misinformation is to confuse providers, right? So they're not prescribing the biosimilars. It's to scare patients and make them think that there's secret unknown ingredients or health consequences for switching to a biosimilar, and ultimately to block access so that patients aren't getting these drugs, which means that they're paying out of pocket and the employers are paying for the much more expensive branded drugs. So what DOJ and FTC should explore is whether some of the statements and actions by branded manufacturers or their associations or their proxies are falsely challenge the safety or effectiveness of biosimilars as a substitute for their reference product.
So for our final question to all 10 panelists, we are going to do a lightning round where we are going to ask you for your 30-second response to what do you think would be the biggest change that would make the most impact in deterring anti-competitive conduct by pharmaceutical companies. So we're going to start with Professor Carrier, and we'll work our way around the panel, ending with Dr. Schandemeyer, excuse me.
So I think in terms of this side of the panel, product hopping is a concern, and you need to think broadly about who is engaging in it, the brand manufacturers as well as the PBMs. And then in terms of delay, pay for delay settlements are still an issue, even though it's getting more and more nuanced, it's still worth attention.
We need PBM reform, and we need to crack down on duplicative, unnecessary patents by passing the Arrington legislation.
I would say PBM reform requiring PBMs to share savings with medicines directly with patients at the counter and fix the misaligned incentives, and fixing the 340B hospital markup program to prevent hospitals from using it as a profit center.
PBM reform, preferring lower cost biosimilars, improving the FDA, getting rid of interchangeability in the suffix, and also improving the IP system. Thank you.
Recognizing it's the collective effect of a myriad of strategies that are delaying or discouraging biosimilar development, taking a holistic approach to this issue, I think, is critically important. And as I noted in my opening remark, the concerns around the price negotiations from the IRA is one example of a policy that can have that kind of chilling effect.
So recognizing that at the end of the day, there's no single answer to this, and that it is not monolithic in its answers, and it's a holistic approach. And my advocacy would be that the agencies and the FDA and the court systems take a surgical look at various practices, pick your best case, win it, and then that will make everybody else fall in line, because nobody wants the future liability. But thinking that it can be done in one fall swoop is never going to happen.
I agree with all the multifactorial solutions, but I think that we can start with stopping to grant bad patents. And I understand it might be done in other industries, but these are prescription drugs. These are not respectfully golf balls or other products. These are things that impact patient lives day to day, life or death for patients. So we need to be looking at prescription drugs as a crucial issue versus the way that other systems work, because again, these are products that patients often don't choose to be on but have to be on for the rest of our lives.
Policymakers need to engage more with data and less with narratives. There's too much generalization from examples that are amenable to too many descriptions. We have to find a way to unburden patients and sharing in the savings, and that presupposes PBM reform first and foremost. Thank you.
I feel like everybody else was told we were going to be asked this, so I didn't really think too much about it, but I wasn't told. But here I go. I said 10% of prescriptions, 80% of spend, branded drugs. High drug prices that people are mostly complaining about has to do with branded drugs. They're just damned expensive. And one of the reasons they're expensive in defense of the industry is that there's clinical trials that are super expensive to conduct. I'd like to see, and this reform has nothing to do with the FTC or DOJ, but I'd like to see some experimentation with the public finance of clinical trials, and in return, a shortened patent term or a shortened period of exclusivity, and see how well that would work.
Reform again is one method that's needed, but there are a lot of aspects to how you reform PBMs and what you do with those. And even PBM reform is not a single shot. It's got multiple arms and legs. I do think we need to revisit the safe harbor rule that says rebates are not kickbacks. Yes, they are. And they behave like that. I think this market is rife with reverse perverse economics. What looks like reverse payments on pay for delay, reverse payments of rebates, PBMs making decisions because they make more money at a higher price than a lower price. Doctors prescribing Part B drugs because they make more money on one drug versus another, even though they may be similar. There are all kinds of reverse perverse economics in this market that need to be sorted out. I believe in markets. Markets work, but we have to also understand the structure of the pharmaceutical market space is not a normal market to begin with. We require that permission slip from the doctor, and the PBM is making the decisions. The insurer or employer is paying for it. The consumer gets caught in the crossfire. This market isn't normal, and we have to understand all of those distortions in the structure of the market to begin with to understand what kinds of behaviors we'll get out at the end after we do reform.
I love that final comment. This market is not normal. And it's what's amazing. We've like this collective wisdom here of all the people in this room. We just have so much knowledge here in this room. This is our very first session with only the first 10 people. And it's shocking to me how many different problems have been identified. I mean, usually when we have a giant antitrust case, we can get to the nub of the problem relatively quickly. But what I'm hearing is like there's a myriad of different problems, and that we need to try to do as much as we can to sort of tackle them. Thankfully, we have an executive order that mandates that we address these problems. So there is there's willingness to do it, I think, at the very top, and a mandate that we all look at it. So we can look at regulatory reform and we can look at antitrust litigation. This has been great. I mean, both of our interlocutors have been phenomenal. The experts have been great. So I'm glad that we had a first listening session. It's obviously being recorded and will be posted. And this is only focusing on generics and biosimilars. Like the other sessions are going to be focusing on other things as well. So our next listening session is July 24th. And I don't know more the details on it, but it's on the event page. Is it going to be in this room as well, or is it going to be the FTC? Do we know, Marcus, where it's going to be? It'll be at the FTC on July 24th. And then obviously we welcome public comments. We welcome further discussion on the event page. If you just Google listening sessions for DOJ and FTC, you can find the event pages for this. So thank you, Marcus. Thank you, all of the experts here in the room. We're adjourned.